All right. This is the second part of the developing countries lecture. So we're going to talk about decolonization. So just follow along with the note sheet, and we'll go from there. All right. First question: why are imperialized nations able to break away from imperialist nations after a war? Well, typically what happens is after you fight a war, your country is worn down. I mean, you've spent a lot of money. You may or may not have damage to your infrastructure, depending on where the war was fought. So after a war, you may have made promises to some of those developing countries as well. To say, hey, help me out with this war, and you'll get freedom afterwards. So these developing countries, these countries that have been taken over by imperialist countries, are able to break away because those Western countries have been weakened, either financially or structurally after the war. They've made promises to those developing countries, say, help us fight, and we'll let you go. All right. If we take a look at, this should say Algeria. Why did Algeria want independence from France? Well, Algeria wanted to have a Arab and Muslim culture. And obviously France is a Christian culture. It's a Western Christian culture. So Algeria wanted independence because they wanted to form their own country around a Arab and Muslim country. What happened during the Algerian Revolution? Well, you had the National Liberation Front, or the NLF, use guerrilla warfare tactics, okay? And not only were they attacking the French army, but they were attacking French civilians that were living there as well. This then in turn led to the French forces torturing the FLN, the National Liberation Front forces. So there were brutal tactics used by both Algeria and France during this revolution, okay? What ends up happening is the French people that were living in Algeria flee, they leave, because there's so much hatred between the two groups, the native Algerians and then the French people that had migrated from France to Algeria to start a new life there, okay? Now here's the problem. Algeria becomes independent in 1962. The problem is it's really tough to create your own country and to stay a viable country. So they have had economic troubles. In the 80s, there was a civil war in the 90s, okay? And you have had multiple elections where there have been people in Algeria said that they've been rigged, that the elections were tampered with by those in power. Okay, so what has happened in Algeria after in the 80s? You had poor economy due to low oil prices. 90s, you had a civil war. And since then, you've had elections that haven't been totally free or fair. Okay. All right, we're going to the next slide. Effects of decolonization. Okay, so a word we need to know here is self-determination. All right, self-determination is when the people of a country determine on their own what type of government they're going to have. Self-determination, okay, is when a country determines on its own what type of government it is going to have. That is self-determination. So after World War II, a lot of new countries are formed because we break up these countries that have been taken over by Germany, all right, and we form these new countries, all right? And so what type of governments are they going to have? Now, here's the problem. Why was self-determination problematic during the Cold War? Well, Russia wants more countries to be communist, whereas the United States, Britain, and France, they want more countries to be democratic. Okay, so you're going to have conflicts between the US and the Soviet Union on trying to manipulate countries, and in some cases taking over countries in the Soviet Union case and making them either communist or, in the United States' hope, you had democratic countries being. Okay, so self-determination is problematic in the Cold War because you have both the US and the Soviet Union fighting inside of these other countries to make sure that they're one version of government or the other. Okay, how do imperialist countries still have influence? Well, trade, the economy. Okay, if I am, even after France lets Algeria go, okay, Algerian companies are used to trading with the French. So they still have to, they're still economically tied to France. Okay, Nigeria, after it's let go by Great Britain, most of its economic ties were with Great Britain. So how do your imperialist countries still have influence in developing countries? Through economy, through trade. Okay. What this leads us to is, why do imperialist countries prevent other countries from developing? It's a theory called dependency theory. Dependency theory. That first world countries keep developing countries beholden to them to maintain power. So if I'm a first world country, I don't want third world countries developing. I don't want them having an economy that is diversified. I'd rather that they depend on me for most of their goods. So imperialist countries prevent other countries from developing due to a thing called dependency theory. I want them, if I'm the United Kingdom, if I'm the United States, if I'm Germany, if I'm Great Britain, if I'm France, I want these developing countries in the Middle East and in Africa dependent on me for most of their economy. That keeps me in power and them needing me. Okay, so that's dependency theory. Okay, all right, that is the end of video number 2 for the